Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Wednesday, April the 1st, 2026. Happy April! And in this video, I will of course be looking at the 12 signs. I also want to consider the broad astrological picture for today, and that includes a full moon. Well, the full moon London time is at 3:12 a.m. tomorrow, Thursday, but in the United States it's going to be late today, Wednesday, so I thought I'd look at the full moon in detail in this video rather than in tomorrow's video. So that's going to be a major theme of this video, the Libran full moon, which we have got very soon. So anyway, let's start off by looking at the overall astrological picture. So here is the chart for today, set for noon on Wednesday, April the 1st, 2026, New York time. And the moon is in Libra. So the moon, has been in Virgo, but it's now changed sign. By the way, don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. So moon in Libra. It's early Libra. It's not in the Via Combustor. Remember, the Via Combustor is the section of the sky between 15 Libra and 15 Scorpio. So, last half of Libra, the moon kind of gets a bit more gets a bit difficult. Via Combustor is often associated with instability. Things not necessarily going to plan, but we don't have to worry about that for the moment. And so moon in Libra, moon is in an air sign, and so we think of moon in Libra, we think about civilization, making sure that everything is properly balanced, and there is always a social side to the moon in Libra. At least there's often a social side, and it can just be about trying to be reasonable. But the moon does make some rather difficult aspects. The moon makes an opposition to Neptune, and then it moves on to make an opposition of Saturn, and between that it makes a trine to Pluto. So moon in Libra, opposition, that Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Aries. There may be times today where there is a degree of uncertainty, where things aren't entirely clear. And this Saturn-Neptune conjunction, it's really making its influence felt, isn't it? It really is. Neptune is, of course, the planet of oil, and with Saturn conjunct Neptune, just constant worries about the oil price, people worrying about how high it's going to go, countries worrying about it, how it's going to mess up with the economies, cause inflation. So we've really got Saturn-Neptune, a Saturn-Neptune conjunction, and now the moon is opposition it, and so things do feel uncertain, and we're not quite sure where things are going. And moon opposition Saturn, it is difficult. Moon opposition Saturn, it might feel like things are grinding to a halt. We can't take the initiative in the way we would like to. It would be great if we could just do what we wanted to do, but it is hard work. Although the moon does make a trine to Pluto, and so the moon trine Pluto, moon in Libra trine Pluto in Aquarius, can be about some kind of transformation. What can we do to create a change? And with moon in Libra, perhaps a whole structure of our social life of people we know, maybe we can make a change. We make a suggestion, we bring people together, we have impromptu meetings. I mean, that is a way in which moon trine Pluto could work, and it just could work on a social level. So we shouldn't assume that everything is as it seems to be on the surface. We don't have to just be hostages to the past or slaves to the past. I mean, with Moon trine Pluto, we can create change. Now, there is a full moon. I don't want to talk about the full moon right now. I'm just going to talk about a couple of other charts, the chart for Australia and New Zealand, the heliocentric chart. Then I'll look at the full moon. So here is the chart for Sydney, Australia at noon. As a representative of Australasia, Australia, New Zealand, and East Asia. So you can see that the moon at midday on April the 1st in Sydney is at 29 degrees Virgo. So, I talked a lot about moon in Libra, but if you are in Australia or New Zealand, for the first part of the day, the moon is in late Virgo, making a trine to Uranus. So to begin with, you don't have to worry about those sort of moon opposition Saturn, moon opposition Neptune, and the full moon is going to happen sort of later from your particular perspective. So moon trine Uranus, that might be suggestive of action, unexpected action. But with moon trine Uranus, it could be just doing a lot of fuss about nothing. So don't over dramatize that aspect. And then we've got the heliocentric picture, putting the Sun at the center of the solar system, and Mercury in Sagittarius is making a square to Mars in Pisces. So that Mercury-Mars square, could stir things up. It might be about what people have to say, and people might get quite annoyed. I mean, that can be how Mercury-Mars manifests. There's a lot to think about and a lot to worry about, and it might at times be difficult to turn our brains off, and what are we going to say? And the Earth is making a sextile to Mercury, and so Earth Mercury sextile. I mean, that's not a bad aspect. So if we're feeling tense, then maybe we should tell people what's on our mind. And then there's the full moon. So here is the chart of the full moon. So this full moon, set for, if I set it for London, is at 3:12 a.m. On Thursday, tomorrow. Now, if you're in United States, then the full moon is going to be at 10:12 p.m. on this evening, on Wednesday evening, and even earlier if you're in California or Los Angeles or Hawaii, Alaska. So I think now might be a good time to talk about this full moon. And of course, we need plenty of warning about the full moon. So don't want to talk about the full moon when it's already happened. So as far as this full moon is concerned, it takes place in Libra. You can see that the moon is at 12 degrees 21 Libra, and it is opposition the Sun, which is at 12 degrees 21 Aries. So when you've got a full moon, by definition, it's moon opposition the Sun. And full moons are an astrological event, which is always prominent, because we can see the full moon. It's not something where we just have to take a computer program's word for it. If if Mercury is square Pluto, can we actually see Mercury square Pluto? Well, if we've got telescopes and so forth, yes, we could rely on the ephemeris, but it's difficult to take these things at trust. I mean, that was a great thing, when we had, a few years ago, when Saturn was really prominent in the sky. It was really great to get a telescope and see Saturn. People talk about Saturn, but does Saturn really exist? And then you you see it in a telescope, you find it yourself, and you find it in the sky and say, yeah, Saturn does exist. I can assure you that Saturn does exist because I've seen it. I've seen it with a telescope. So, that's a great thing about that. And, likewise with the full moon, you can see a full moon. And, full moons, are often about the truth, a realization. Something has been developing. The moon has been waxing, it's been getting bigger and bigger, and then suddenly the full moon is the key point in the cycle, in the lunar cycle, where we see things for what they really are. And we see the consequences of our actions. And, this full moon is, Sun in Aries, opposition the moon in Libra. So Sun in Aries is about action. It's a fire sign, obviously. Sun is in a fire sign, and it's a very strong sun because it's exalted in Aries, and so that is all about what we are doing, what we are starting, and if we start something, we have to deal with the consequences. And so, this lunar cycle, well, it actually started with a new moon at 28 degrees Pisces. And this new moon kind of developed into an Aries new moon, because you had the sun and the moon in Aries. And now we've got the full moon. And so I think it is about consequences. There is the action of the sun in Aries, but then moon in Libra. You maybe got to think about other people. What about the human dimension? What do other people think? We weren't really maybe thinking about that. Okay, maybe not us, but the people that started that action are now having to, deal with diplomacy and maybe different countries. I mean, if we're talking, for example, about what's going on in Iran, okay, the attack on Iran took place, now, quite a long time ago now. It's over a month ago. But, when you've got a full moon in Libra, and you've got a war situation, you might be thinking about what now? You've taken the initiative. Aries can be about bold actions, but then Libra is saying, well, yeah, what next? What exactly are you going to do? And this full moon is linked with Saturn, with Jupiter, because you could say that this full moon is a T-square, because you've got the moon opposition the sun, and then you've got Jupiter on the T, and so with Jupiter on the T, it is quite Jupiterian. How do you resolve that contradiction between Sun in Aries wanting to take action with moon in Libra wanting to be reasonable, maybe wanting to compromise? What is the resolution? And the resolution might be Jupiter in Cancer. Perhaps showing some sensitivity. Jupiter is still quite an expansive energy, but we do have to use our feelings maybe with Jupiter in Cancer, and start to understand the whole picture, and perhaps try to be moral. Maybe there is a moral answer, because I do think that Jupiter is quite a moral energy, especially as it's in Cancer, because it's exalted in Cancer, trying to do the right thing. And the right thing is not necessarily to take the initiative. The right thing is not necessarily to worry too much about surface appearances and diplomacy, moon in Libra, but the right thing is to act morally, and that could be a way of looking at this full moon. To always think about the moral dimension. I do think that is pretty important. And when we look at a full moon, and we should ask ourselves, what aspects are close at the time of this full moon. And one aspect that is close is Mercury trine Jupiter. Mercury is 14 Pisces. It's trine Jupiter, which is 15, 16 Cancer. And so maybe part of the resolution to this full moon, because I think the full moon does represent a problem, part of a resolution might be through Mercury trine Jupiter, which is more communication. It's about the sensitivity of these two planets, because this Mercury Jupiter trine does take place in water signs, and so the question is, do we have the sensitivity to deal with a potential conflict, or to deal with two things which just seem really very difficult to bring together. Now, when you've got a full moon, it's it's often a good idea to look at the midpoints. What midpoints is the full moon itself on. So let's look at the 90-degree dial. So if you've got a full moon on a 90-degree dial, it will come over as a conjunction, because on a 90-degree dial, conjunctions, oppositions, and squares are shown as conjunctions. Semi-squares and sesquiquadrates are shown as oppositions. So turning to the 90-degree dial, here it is. So there is there's the sun and the moon. You can see they are together, and so there we are. So at sort of 12:21 cardinal. So what midpoints are they on? They're on the Hades Cupido midpoint, the Cupido Hades midpoint. So Cupido and Hades are these two planets which are used by the Uranian school, the Hamburg school, however you want to call it, founded by Alfred Witte. And so these two planets, well, the Cupido is kind of seen as being the planet of marriage, as being love, and love, maybe you can see that by how it's formed. The symbol for Cupido is kind of a part of the Jupiter, kind of Jupiter and Venus sort of wound up with one another. And then Hades is about death and decay, and sometimes criminality. And Hades, the symbol for Hades, is kind of more serious. It's a sort of half circle with a cross. I assume that cross relates to sort of cemeteries. And so that when you think about the Cupido Hades midpoint, one way of looking at the Cupido Hades midpoint might be to see it in quite a sort of a Wagnerian way, love and death coming together. What do they call it? Is it sorry, I don't speak German, but it's something like Leben Tod, something like that. And that is a Wagnerian theme. And so, this full moon might be about love and death, seeing how close people can be, having this sort of ideal of love, and at the same time realizing it's just not going to last. And there is maybe then something quite tragic about this full moon. But you could say it is just hypothetical. I mean, let me just see what Alfred Witte says about the sun and the moon on the Cupido Hades midpoint. So he says with Cupido Hades, he doesn't seem to like this combination much. Marriage in poverty, low and vile company, egoism, individualism, poor societies or associations. So he says the sun on the Cupido Hades midpoint, the man who very much feels his dependence through poverty, itinerant artist, to make a living by roaming around, whereas moon on the Cupido Hades midpoint, women belonging to a lower sphere, popular art, the people or the public under the impact of a sad event. So there is something a bit gloomy about this moon on the Cupido Hades midpoint. And of course, it might be the case that you are not convinced by the hypotheticals, in which case one might say that this full moon is not necessarily especially dramatic. I mean, I know that there is a tendency to make full moons dramatic. Particularly if you've got to make videos about them. You've got to say, "Oh, this is the most important full moon for the last 5,000 years," or whatever, and it's just such an important full moon that I do have to make a video about it, or whatever. I don't regard this full moon in itself as being especially significant, but it is happening at the same time as a big conflict. We know this, and so how does it relate to the conflict? What's going on in Iran, and so it would be a good idea to look at the astrocartography, of this full moon. So let's look at the astro map. I hope you can see it. So here is. Here's the astro map. Here is, we'll do it for the world. So here's the full moon, and what we're looking for is places on Earth where the full moon is on an angle. So you see this yellow line. This yellow line here. This yellow line here is all of the places where the sun is on the ascendant and the moon is on the descendant. And this line here, it goes through it goes through Dubai, and it goes through Tehran, not the capital of Iran. So it does hit the Gulf, and we know the Gulf is problematic. And I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but still, it confirms the drama. And so, if we take this full moon and we relocate it relocate it for Dubai, this is the chart. So. This is the time for London. So it is a time for London, but it is relocated for Dubai. So at the exact time of this full moon, the sun is rising. The sun is almost exactly rising in Dubai, and the moon is on the descendant. Now you could say that is kind of a new beginning. It's certainly an important point for Dubai. I mean, does this in itself talk about destruction? Okay, we know that the sun is on the Cupido-Hades midpoint, but I don't think that in itself is destructive. I mean, the moon is about sort of enemies. So the full moon, from a Dubai perspective, this is when the truth hits, when it really does become clear, what has happened. It is obvious, and and it's kind of interesting that this full moon hits Dubai. I mean, this it does matter. We can relocate it for other places. So if we relocate this full moon for Jerusalem, Cupido, no, not Cupido. Black Moon Lilith is quite close to the midheaven, true Black Moon Lilith, and additionally we've got Mercury rising, we've got the North Node rising, and we've got Mercury making a trine to Jupiter at the time of this full moon. Kind of a rather different energy. Maybe Mercury rising is about what the Israeli government is communicating. There is perhaps a bit of subterfuge here. I mean, Mercury is in a water sign, and you could say that it is about the impression that the Israeli government is trying to create, but it's quite clever. I mean, it's, that Mercury trine Jupiter. It is perhaps about trying to create a particular image, and then we can take this full moon and we can set it for Tehran, the capital of Iran. So here is the chart. Like in Dubai, the sun is rising, but not exactly rising. It's a bit of time before sunset. So here, the ascendant is at 7 degrees Aries, and the sun is at 12 degrees Aries. So this full moon certainly hits the Gulf in general. But what does it say about Iran? That degree, that rising degree, I find that rising degree interesting, of 742 Aries. And I'll tell you why I find it interesting. Because later in the month, on I think is it the 19th of April, there is a Mars-Saturn conjunction. So there is a Mars-Saturn conjunction. I mean, this is relocated, so I'm not saying that this is this is not Tehran time, where we have the Mars-Saturn conjunction, but I don't think. But anyway, the Mars-Saturn conjunction is on April 19th, and this Mars-Saturn conjunction is at 7 degrees 52 Aries. So that's the degree of it. And so what's happening is that, and also we've got Mercury at 7 degrees 06. So going back to the lunation, set for Tehran, the Mars-Saturn conjunction, which takes place just over 2 weeks later, is exactly on the ascendant of the full moon set for Tehran. So that may say something about how April develops. Mars-Saturn is quite a dangerous energy, and we can't avoid it. It is probably the most worrying thing about April, this Mercury-Mars-Saturn conjunction, and I do think that Tehran, Iran in general, because Tehran is the capital of the country, may be impacted by it. Now, when we think about Iran, I mean, I've said happy April. I should be saying happy birthday to the Islamic Republic of Iran. It is Iran's birthday. And here is the horoscope of Iran. You can see Iran was born on April the 1st, 1979. Some would say April Fool's Day. It's not much of a joke, though, is it? And so having a full moon close to the time of its birthday, that might be significant. I mean, it's not exactly in the solar return. But, I mean, here is the solar. I've got the solar return for Iran somewhere. So if you look at the solar return for Iran, here it is. The moon is opposition Mars. So this is its 47th birthday, and you've got Black Moon Lilith on the ascendant. But that Moon Mars opposition, it does matter, and we've got a full moon quite close to Iran's sun. So we do have something important going on. So it depends who you read, doesn't it? I mean, it depends who you listen to. I mean, some say that Iran is winning this war. Others say that Iran is about to collapse. I mean, who do you believe? I mean, it's just propaganda. Just because you win in the short term doesn't mean you win in the long term. Things can change, and Iran does have its it does have its sun in Aries. So going back to the chart for Iran, so we know that this full moon is on Iran's Aries sun. and later on, Saturn will be making a conjunction to Iran's sun. Now that will be later in the year. I mean, Saturn is moving quite quickly at the moment. So when is Saturn exactly on Iran's sun? So when is Saturn? In other words, when is Saturn at 11:06? So Saturn is at 11:06 Aries in May, which would be May the 19th, 20th. So next month, Saturn is on Iran's sun, and I do think that really could be difficult. Additionally, when you're looking at Iran's chart, Mars, Saturn's moving pretty close. Sorry, Mars is about to conjunct Iran's Mars. In other words, Iran is about to have a Mars return. Over the next next few days, over the next week, and Mars will also be hitting Iran's Mercury. So Iran has a Mercury-Mars conjunction in Pisces. So I mean that says a lot about Iran. I mean Iran, they say a lot. Iranian propaganda. I mean I'm not taking sides here, but Iran definitely has a large propaganda department. They do say a lot for themselves, and Mars is going to be hitting that, and so Mars on that Mercury Mars, could be problematic for Iran. And finally, there's the United States, and with the United States, there's one aspect which I did notice, and so here's the United States' chart. And the United States has its a moon opposition true black moon Lilith. And the United States' moon is at 2710 Aquarius. In fact, this full moon does hit the US. So just let me show you how. There is the full moon at 12 degrees 21 Libra. And it's making a pretty close sesquiquadrate to the United States' moon. And it's also making a micro aspect to the United States' Pluto. I mean, that's a micro aspect. That's a 15-degree series. But if you look at the United States' chart, the moon, it has a moon-Pluto semisextile, because they're 30 degrees apart, and the moon is making the full moon is semi-square sesquiquadrate United States' moon, and it's also making a 15-degree series aspect to the United States' Pluto. So in a way, the whole Pluto return thing, which has been kind of dominating America for the last few years. I know the Pluto return is apparently over, but I don't think it's over at all. And it is about division. You do have a divided society, and I think that this full moon is just not going to be easy for the US, and it's going to really sort of stir things up. It's perhaps going to make people feel just dissatisfied short term. That doesn't mean to say it's necessarily going to end up being disastrous for the Republicans and Trump. I mean, there are different ways of looking at it. We shouldn't forget that Venus is starting to make a sextile to Jupiter, and all things being equal, Venus sextile Jupiter shouldn't be so bad. I mean, Jupiter represents the Republican Party, so maybe this Venus sextile Jupiter will provide some relief, but obviously things are not particularly easy for Trump with this war in Iran. So this full moon, it can be important in certain areas. I think the full moon is important for the Gulf, it's important for Tehran, it's important for Dubai, maybe important for the US, although in general, I'm just not convinced that this full moon is particularly spectacular. Anyway, that's a full moon, and now I want to turn to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Wednesday, April the 1st, 2026. Aries. It is a time where you want to move forward. I mean, after all, the sun is now in your sign. You feel that everything is finally coming together. And the path ahead seems clear. Well, it would be nice if it was clear, but we do have a full moon coming up. And this full moon is in Libra, so we've got the moon moving through Libra, making an opposition to the sun. Now, this full moon may not be exact today. I mean, it might be exact tomorrow. It depends on your time zone, but nonetheless, we do have moon in Libra and the sun in Aries, so they are in signs which are opposite one another. So you can feel the build up to this full moon, and that means that you're aware of something else, something that just has to be considered. You don't necessarily want to consider it, but you don't really have a choice. Now, we might be talking about a person that just can't be avoided, or it just could be a situation that you don't really want to have to consider, but nonetheless it does matter. And I know that full moons can be difficult, but they can also be about the truth and seeing the truth for what it really is. And so you now perhaps have the possibility of some objectivity. Perhaps you hadn't really thought about something, but now it is beginning to make sense. And it's not just the fact we've got a build up to a full moon. We've also got the moon opposition Saturn, and we have to think about what that might mean. I mean, now that Saturn is in Aries, that could be about your own desire for discipline and structure, and you feeling that you need to get yourself together. And you might transmit this feeling of urgency, perhaps. You don't want any chaos, you don't want disorganization, you want things to be done properly, and perhaps someone else will pick up on this. So that Saturn opposition moon, it could be that you are having an impact on another person. Perhaps you're being rather too serious, more serious than you have to be. And the sun is still pretty close to Saturn, just 6 degrees off, and so that may say something about you and how you are expressing yourself. So don't be tougher than you have to be, although with the full moon you need to be aware that things aren't entirely simple, and maybe you have to explain why things aren't so simple. And you are though helped by the fact that you're quite tuned in. You might not feel tuned in, but if you make the effort, you can have a good understanding about what is going on emotionally, and your ability to understand people's thoughts and feelings and motivations could be pretty good. And so use that sensitivity. Don't rush to judgment. And as your feelings develop, as your sensitivity becomes increasingly fine-tuned, there might be a growing feeling of realization. You just understand something, and it is very clear. You don't necessarily know why it's clear. You don't know why you've reached these conclusions, but it's just happened. And so if you feel sure about something, Aries, then I would probably say, well, just go with it. Sometimes Aries, you can, trust your own judgment. Taurus, there is some tension in the air. Things aren't quite clear, and you don't feel that you have quite as much freedom as you'd like to have. Things were looking good. I mean, things are still looking good, by the way. I mean, Venus, is now in your sign, and it's starting to make a sextile to Jupiter. Okay, it's a bit of a way before you've got the exact sextile to Jupiter, but it's getting closer, and so there is certainly a lot to be optimistic about. But still, there is that feeling of tension. Maybe things aren't moving, quite as fast as you'd like them to do, and this is kind of putting you on edge, and you feel that something has to happen, something should happen. But maybe it's just not happening, or it's just not happening at sufficient speed. So the question is, what do you do? Being a Taurus, there is a temptation to just hang on to the way you feel. So you feel tense. You're not going to do anything about it. You're not going to create any change. You're just gonna hang on to your own feelings and your own frustrations. I mean, it could happen like that, but I'm not saying it needs to happen like that. I think that Taurus, you do have quite a lot of freedom at the moment. More freedom than you actually recognize, and you have the capacity to make things happen. Not through brute force, but maybe through charm. You can be very charming, and you know what to say, you know what to do. You can perhaps use some targeted flattery, and you might find that something which appeared to be an unmovable obstacle suddenly relaxes. It's gone, or it's just not so difficult to move out of a way. And so there is a way of influencing people, and it's just not quite as difficult as you'd imagined. And you have different tools in your armory. You can use you can use charm. You can maybe use a bit of manipulation. I mean, Venus is moving towards a square of Pluto. Now, this Venus square Pluto, okay, it's not going to be exact for a few more days, but it's still very much with you. And if you want to be gently manipulative, well, I think I think this is something you very much can do. Now, at the same time, Taurus, we do need a bit of order. I mean, you need a bit of order. Well, maybe it's me as well. I mean, I've got Taurus rising. We need order, we need structure, and we just can't allow things to get too chaotic. I mean, this might happen, and so make things as simple as possible. Make things clear, and if something is disorganized or chaotic, I think you'll see it. You'll know what the problem is, and once you know what the problem is, you will be in a position to do something about it. And additionally, don't let your sort of inner feelings get in the way. I mean, Venus. I've talked about Venus. Venus, is well placed in Taurus, but it is making a semi-sextile to Neptune. So, Neptune in Aries, could represent, your unconscious, the way you're feeling, some of your illusions and delusions, and that could trip you up. But you need to hold on to what you know to be true, what you can see to be true, and if the truth is absolutely apparent, if it's in front of you, if you can touch the truth, then why make things more complicated than they have to be. So Taurus, try as far as you can to keep it simple, and at the same time recognize that your social skills at the moment are very good, and if something seems difficult, then it needn't be difficult, and it may just be that you need to just say the right words, be kind, make people feel good about themselves, and things should be pretty easy. Gemini, you're kind of looking for action. You feel that something should be happening. You're not quite sure what, but there's a certain sort of buzz in the air, and you kind of want to be part of it. You don't want to miss out on anything. And of course, being a Gemini, you are someone who is quite curious, and you want to know what's going on, and you want to know what's going on, like as soon as possible. So do be open to sort of interesting possibilities. But if you're looking for excitement, consider the possibility that you are the excitement. So if nothing is happening, nothing is going on, and you want something to happen, then it may all be down to you, to create the action. And this is something you very much can do. Mercury is moving towards a trine of Jupiter. It's pretty close now. So Mercury, your ruler, making that trine to Jupiter, you're feeling good. You're feeling good about the way things could work out, and that does mean that you have to do something about it. You mustn't assume that everything is just going to go your way without any effort. I mean, you have to make some effort, not a lot of effort, but just a little bit of effort. Just you have to push things a bit, and that should be enough. And this Mercury trine Jupiter which is getting closer. It is an important aspect. It's maybe not especially dramatic, but it does allow you to get yourself together, to focus on things that matter. There's potentially a financial aspect to this Moon Jupiter contact, and if you want to make an effort to make something happen of a financial nature, maybe you can. Maybe you just have to say the right words, or ask for something. So if you feel that financially something is missing, maybe it is just a case of asking. And this Mercury trine Jupiter, it does work in many different ways, and it can also be about how you get on with other people. And I think that this is a time over the next couple of days when your contacts with the outside world could be very smooth, and there may be one particular person who you can really get on with, and it should be straightforward. And why would you want to get on with someone? It may just be because you like them. It may be because there's a shared interest, or perhaps you can benefit in a material way from having the right connections with the right person. Overall, Gemini, I'm not saying that today is particularly spectacular. I don't think you can expect everything to be handed to you on a plate. But if you take action and you make sure that you try to keep things moving, you look to where the excitement is, and just remember that you can be that excitement. And if you think that something is boring, then maybe you're the one that can stir things up. You're the one that can turn on the lights and that can get everyone's attention. Cancer. The moon is in Libra, and it's approaching fullness. So the moon is opposition sun. Well, perhaps this evening, perhaps tomorrow. Kind of depends on your time zone. But with the moon in Libra, you probably feel that you're just okay where you are. Things are maybe just complicated enough, and you don't want to make things any more difficult. So just do what feels comfortable. I mean, that might be your immediate reaction to things. And the moon is it's making an opposition to Neptune. It's making an opposition to Saturn, and in the end, it makes an opposition to the sun. And of course, the sun, the moon opposition sun, that the definition of that is a full moon. So the Aries planets are challenging. You would like to do very little, but the outside world might have a different opinion. So, this might all then be experienced as just pressure. You're being pressured to do something that you don't want to do. And Cancer, you may regard it as being a win-lose situation. You either hold firm or you compromise, you surrender. And it's really not like that. I mean, full moons, they can be complicated. And, the problem with a full moon, this build up to the full moon, is you're having to focus on two different ideas, two ways of being, which may, at least on the surface, be impossible to reconcile. And, you have to think about, what is important to you. But then you've also got to think about how you present yourself in the outside world. And, if you're presenting yourself in the outside world, if you're really, pushing yourself forward, well, that's too difficult, that's complicated, and that's not really something you want to do. But somehow the outside pressure has to be respected, and you need to give the impression that you actually understand what's going on and that you're able to live up to your responsibilities. So it's not like you have to do anything crazy. You have to spend, all day running around, doing what you're told, perhaps being somewhere, where the bright lights, are on you. You don't have to do that, but you just need to give the impression that you are aware of the pressure, that you are aware of the various responsibilities that you have. It is a time of responsibility, and that should be a good thing. You do have a lot to offer. And the moon additionally makes a trine to Pluto, and that moon trine Pluto could be quite strengthening. It just makes you feel powerful. And, even if things seem a bit crazy, you're holding firm to what you believe in. And it's probably the case that you can listen to other people, that you can do things in the public eye, perhaps. Or, for example, I don't know, if you're working, you've got a career, you have to make an effort, and you might not want to, but it's not a big deal. And I do think that you have a chance to do enough to make other people happy, and it may go further than that. This full moon. Okay, I don't want to say everything about this full moon, because this full moon does carry on through to tomorrow. But with this full moon, it does give you perhaps an idea about the sort of home work balance. You can't be a complete workaholic, but on the other hand, you can't spend all your time at home doing nothing, and you do, or spending all your time worrying about your family, and you need to think about how you're going to get that balance right. But I think it's something that you can achieve. Leo, there is a bit of a struggle going on. I mean, not a serious struggle, not a struggle involving other people and conflict. One individual conflicting with another. It's more about your attitude and how you are seeing things. Part of you, wants to be optimistic. You want to see things in the best possible light. You want to see how everyone can come together, how you can find real harmony. But then, on the other hand, you see that everything is it's not just trivial, it's temporary, and you can see how things are fading. It's almost like things are fading the moment they appear, the moment they come into the light, the moment you look at them and you see how wonderful something is, you immediately start to see it decaying away. And the temporary nature of everything may be really getting to you, Leo. And it's just the way things are. And it of course has some sort of spiritual relevance. You can't get attached to anything, and that includes people. Just as soon as you get attached to someone, you recognize someone's importance and perhaps their central role in your life. As soon as that happens, and you're thinking about the ending and how everything inevitably must end. So there is a seriousness, underlying today. I don't think that you need to, worry about it too much, but it does give you, a certain gravitas. But don't worry about it, too much. And you do have to, though, think about a full moon. Again, full moons are quite serious, and the full moon, whether it's this evening or tomorrow, depends on your time zone. The full moon can be about you recognizing that not everything is correct. You might have thought things were correct. You might have thought that the details and the facts were all in order, but with the full moon, you're starting to look at things again, and as you move into Thursday, again, you have another look, you keep having another look, and it just becomes obvious that things aren't entirely right, and that may say then something about your ideas. Ideas should be in a state of permanent change. You can't hang on to ideas forever. Ideas have to be abandoned. They have to be at least adjusted, and that is a lot of what the full moon is about. You recognizing that you don't have all the answers, and if you think you've got all the answers, then at some stage you're going to be disappointed, and you cannot neglect any fact. I mean, part of you would like to. You're told something, or you read something that contradicts your self-view, and it's not comfortable. But when we've got a full moon, we have to embrace the truth. Even if the truth is somewhat difficult. But maybe I'm just making things too complicated. Perhaps we should just keep it simple. And if we want to keep it simple, we just focus on the fact that Venus is moving through Taurus. I mean, I've already talked about Taurus, Moon and Venus in Taurus. I think Venus in Taurus is great. It's well placed. It's in its own sign. It's in a high profile part of your chart, and I've said that Venus in Taurus is about you looking good. and feeling hopefully optimistic, and also just concentrating on what is important to you, and not allowing yourself to be distracted or to feel too worried about anything. I mean, you might feel that it's a competitive situation, that there are forces out there which might prevent you from achieving whatever it is you want to achieve, but I wouldn't worry about it too much. Just enjoy Venus moving through Taurus, and just don't worry about things too much. I think that that would be that would be unnecessary, and you haven't got everything right, and just because something doesn't make sense doesn't mean to say that you have to worry too much about it. Things will make sense in the end, and part of the challenge of this full moon is perhaps to hold on to two ideas simultaneously, two ideas which, at least in the first instance, seem to contradict each other. Virgo, you are not entirely happy with the status quo. You kind of feel that it needs to be upset. Why not? You know that things can't go on forever, and you also know that we are living in dramatic times, all of us, and if we just assume that everything is fine, but just everything will continue in the same old way, well, we're going to be disappointed. And so, Virgo, you might be of the view that it's a good idea to embrace change. I mean, that's what it's there for. If you can see a revolution coming up, then you want to be part of that revolution. You want to be someone who is an initiator. What you don't want to do, Virgo, is just to be passive. You allow change to develop. You do nothing. You don't adjust. You don't react. And then when the real change happens, when the real revolution happens, then you're powerless, and you get sort of picked up by these huge collective waves, and you could get thrown around, you could get pushed and dumped anywhere. And so if you feel that change is happening, Virgo, then your job is to really start to understand what is happening, really embrace it. And change can take many forms, and we've got a full moon coming up, and this full moon is across the financial axis of your chart, and you've got Moon in Libra, opposition with Sun in Aries. The Moon in Libra also makes an opposition to Saturn in Aries, and I'm thinking particularly about Moon-Saturn opposition. I mean, Moon-Saturn opposition, is not great. It can sort of force you to come down to earth, and it could say something about. Could say something about money. I mean, money is something serious. You're a Virgo, you're an earth sign, you know that everything has to be paid for, the books have to balance, and with Moon opposition Saturn on top of the developing full moon, it just might occur to you that something financially is not completely in control, and you need to find out what's going on. And so perhaps with this full moon, your challenge is to start to uncover the truth, to not hide the financial reality. You might like to hide it. I mean, that's always the thing, isn't it? Out of sight, out of mind. But that's not a reasonable solution to anything. Out of sight, out of mind. And if you're prepared to make a special effort to understand what's going on as quickly as possible, then I think that you might have some important realizations, and it just could be that you have a chance to take prompt action, and by taking prompt actions, you can really make things just so much easier for yourself. Libra, we have a build up to a full moon, and this full moon is it may be exact tomorrow morning, it may be exact this evening, maybe exact I don't know, early afternoon if you're in Australia or New Zealand. When I say early afternoon, I say early afternoon of Thursday. So the exact time of this full moon is I think it's 3:12 a.m. On Thursday, London time. So if you're in Australia, New Zealand, well, in fact, Eurasia, Africa, technically this full moon, is tomorrow, which is Thursday. But there's still this build up to the full moon. We still have, on today, Wednesday, we've got the moon in Libra, sun in Aries. So that represents the build up, and this build up, is taking place in a way that does directly impact your sign. I mean, after all, the moon is in Libra. The moon is in your sign, and so you want things to be done in a particular way. You're trying to make sense of things. You're trying to balance yourself to fit the external environment, but then the moon makes an opposition to Neptune, it makes an opposition to Saturn, and then it makes an opposition to the Sun. So all of these oppositions could be unsettling, and this full moon, as well as the oppositions between Saturn and Neptune, may say something about other people, about relationships, and are you starting to understand something about another person? Is it going to be good or is it going to be bad? Well, all things being equal, it may not be easy, but if you know the truth, then you're in a much better position. You can make decisions on the basis of what you know, what you can see. If you don't address yourself to the challenges of a full moon, and you try to make sense of people, it could be difficult. But the truth is available, and if you can deal with the truth, I think, I do think that things are going to be a lot easier. And I think another reason why you need clarity is because you may start the day feeling quite tense. I mean, starting Wednesday, you just might feel that just something has to give, that it's not quite right, and you're nervous, and you need a resolution. And it could be that someone else is making you nervous, someone else's behavior, which you're not immediately conscious of, is kind of unsettling. And then there might be this growing moment of realization, and I mean that could make things more straightforward. Because if you're feeling tense, you're feeling nervous, you are looking for a resolution, and it's quite possible that you can find that resolution. Now, Libra, I don't want to indicate that it's going to be a bad Wednesday. I mean, why should it be a bad Wednesday? I mean, Venus is still in Taurus, and with Venus in Taurus, you're going to be fine, provided you don't get too tied up with other people and their dramas. I mean, I think that is important. Libra is a sociable sign, and you do think that people are important, but they can't be that important, and you do have to think about yourself, and that is something you can do, especially as Venus is making a square to Pluto. So Venus in Taurus making a square to Pluto in Aquarius. That square is challenging you to be quite independent in your own way, to be almost sort of emotionally independent. You have your feelings, you have the power of your feelings, and you want to maybe do something with them. And perhaps it's through the transforming power of enjoyment. You do something that is really precious to you, that is very special to you. Maybe other people can't fully appreciate, but you do it and you feel alive. And, if you feel alive, I mean, what more can you be worried about? There's nothing to worry about. If you are alive, you're doing the right thing. And, you feel that inner power, and then, you can transcend, these sort of short-term issues, which, they may be exacerbated by other people, but Libra, you need to value your own independence and indeed enjoy your own independence. Scorpio. The moon is in Libra. We've got full moon, and this full moon, it does impact everyone. I wouldn't have said that this full moon is necessarily going to have a huge impact on you. It's probably something that can be ignored, but if it does have an impact, I think that this full moon, is about you keeping your own counsel. I don't think that there's much you want to discuss. You have your own ideas. There are things that you're being quite secretive about, maybe in that Scorpio kind of way. But secrecy for the sake of it, is of limited value. You just make things, sort of serious and intense, and that's the way you are, and you don't give much away, but maybe in the process you don't achieve very much either. And perhaps if you've been holding on to something too tightly, you need to have some kind of awareness of where it's all going. And the moon is making an opposition to Saturn, and if the moon is making an opposition to Saturn, it just could occur to you that it's not actually the right thing to be doing to keep something secret. Just keeping it to yourself, not discussing it, and not taking any action. And perhaps what you have to do is take action. If you just hold on to something, well, it's just going to fester and rot. Instead, you can do something to make something real. Perhaps it's making a fantasy real and grounding it. And that could be what the Moon-Saturn opposition is telling you. You've got to bring something down to earth. And following the Moon-Saturn opposition, we also have the growing influence of a full moon, and you might then have a feeling of sort of realization. Suddenly, things make sense, and you realize what it is that you need to do, what it is that you bring down to earth, and you are going to be helped by your own scorpionic sensitivity. Yeah, you are going to be quite sensitive to what is happening around you. It's going to be difficult to hide anything from you. You will just pick things up. You'll pick up people's feelings, their thoughts, their body language, and you're going to be well informed about the overall environment, without having to read anything, without having to ask any questions. You'll just have a feeling, and to an extent you can trust that feeling, but you don't want to trust any feelings. You don't want to trust anything if it means sort of going over a cliff. I mean, you can't trust your life in your own vibes, with your own, you can get vibes, and usually you can trust your vibes, but you don't want to, take huge risks. And, there is some danger of deception. And the question is, who is deceiving who? And if you are told something, it might be true, it might not be true, and you get an idea by listening to another person, but you do have to work things out for yourself. And if something doesn't quite feel right, then check it out. Check the facts. Through your own independent sources, and probably 9 times out of 10, you'll realize that your own feelings were right all along. But there's no harm in just doing a check. You don't want to run into trouble just because you believed something. You believed yourself. You believed another person. And belief on its own it should probably be avoided. I mean, yeah, it's good to believe, but getting independent validation, that I think is certainly something that is worth doing. Sagittarius. It's perhaps another day when it could be quite difficult to do things which are concrete. Now, that doesn't mean to say you are powerless, but if you have a set of concrete actions that you absolutely want to do, you want to express them, you want to make it happen, then you might be disappointed. And this has been a situation for quite a few days, and why would you want to take the risk? If something can be done later, then do it later. Why do today what you can put off until tomorrow? I mean, I know that is not a very popular maxim, but I think it is a maxim that does have value. Particularly now, it very often is a good time to delay, because just the time is not necessarily right, and it's probably, Sagittarius, not the right time to be making decisions. You make a decision, you feel sure of yourself, and that decision may be based on just false information, and instead you need to have an open mind. Just be open to anything. Anything is possible, and nothing is possible. Everything could be a lie. It could just be propaganda, but you can certainly listen. And I think that having an open-minded approach, but also being very skeptical. You listen to what everyone says. You don't have favorites. But at the same time, you don't give anyone the benefit of the doubt. And I do think that is the right approach. And of course, we do have the moon making an opposition to Saturn. The moon also makes an opposition to Neptune, and with that, it's probably best to trust your own judgment compared to anyone else's judgment. I mean, I'm not saying that your judgment should be trusted. I've already suggested you shouldn't make decisions today. But what about another person's judgment? What if another person is really suggesting that you do something, or you believe something? Well, with this full moon, it might be a time where you recognize or realize that someone has got it wrong, that you can't believe anyone. Even your closest friends, they might give you advice, they might tell you what to do, but do they know? I don't think they do. So you can be quite indecisive today. I think you should be indecisive. I mean, there is a value in being indecisive, because if you're decisive, it does mean you know what you're doing. And I just think that right now it might be best to sit on the fence. You can't sit on the fence forever, but today, Wednesday, that might be the best place to be. Capricorn. Pressure has been developing. The pressure to go above yourself. I mean, I think, at the moment, Capricorn, you might have just wanted to not really do anything, just to be, happy where you are. Thinking about your comfort, your home, just not wanting to go further than the boundary fence. You've got your boundaries, and if you stick to your boundaries, well, maybe you'll be fine. But there is a full moon, or at least there's a build-up to a full moon. And okay, this full moon may not be exact until tomorrow, but with this build-up to a full moon, you can feel that there are things you'd like to do, and you're perhaps quite aware of your sort of growing ambition, and ambitions need to be honored. If you're ambitious about something, well, you've got to do something, because otherwise your ambitions is just hot air. But if you follow your ambitions, that means that you might have to destabilize yourself. You might have to do something you don't want to do. It's pressure. Talking to people, making phone calls, making demands. It's not what you want to do, but it's probably something that you should be doing. And this full moon, or as this full moon develops, okay, this full moon might not be until tomorrow, Thursday, but this full moon is asking for action. It's asking for you to take things further, and you're quite capable of taking things further. You have a lot of energy at the moment. You might not feel you have this energy, but perhaps that's because you're not doing anything, because you haven't put it to the test. But as soon as you decide you want to focus on one particular thing, or maybe several things as well, doing several things simultaneously, if you want to do it, as soon as you start trying to make things happen, you start to realize how much energy you actually have. And with this energy, well, you could cause yourself a bit of damage. So it can be a problem having too much energy if that energy is not properly focused. But you're a Capricorn, and Capricorns have the capacity to know what is important, to know where to direct their energy. And once you find the right place for directing the power of your personality, then I do think that things can really start to move. Aquarius. Well, the moon is in Libra. It's not a bad place for the moon to be in, especially from an Aquarian perspective. I mean, you are an air sign, and so having the moon in Libra just, appears to make things easy. Things seem to be running smoothly, and from a social perspective, I think that there are things going on. Maybe different people to meet. Maybe you'll enjoy the company of new and interesting individuals. On the other hand, the moon is making an opposition to Saturn. And, with this moon opposition Saturn, you maybe should avoid spending too much time with, any one person, because, it might start off as being fine, but everyone can become too much of a good thing. People might start to assert themselves in ways which might not be desirable. They might try to restrict your freedom of action, and so you've always got to be able to move. I mean, movement matters. Your freedom matters, and right now, Aquarius, you actually have quite a lot of energy at your disposal. You need to be able to use that energy. So what you don't want to happen is that involved with particular people, and they take up your time, and you can't get away, and you feel frustrated, and you get annoyed, and just the day could just feel very unsatisfactory. So it is important, Aquarius, that you really do recognize how much energy you have, and what you can do with this energy, because I really do feel that you can do a great deal. You can really make things happen, and it might just be in terms of what you say. I mean, you do have at the moment, Aquarius, a lot to say, and you need to just make sure that you've got the right audience. Not everyone understands what you're talking about, but there are people that do, and maybe, Aquarius, it's a time where you have to sort of move from one place to another. You go to one group of people, another group of people. Maybe it works in one place, doesn't work in another place. So it's important to keep your options open, and if you can do that, then I think that today should work pretty well for you. Pisces. Well, Pisces, there is a full moon, or at least there's a build-up to the full moon. I mean, if you're in the Americas, then probably this full moon is this evening. If you're not in the Americas, it will be tomorrow sometime. I think the full moon, for example, London time, is at 3:12 a.m. on Thursday. So this full moon, you can feel it, and it's not entirely satisfactory. This full moon might remind you of how complicated things are. Not everything is easy, and you might see how difficult certain things are. They're not straightforward, and there may be some very real complications that have to be dealt with. Now, Pisces, you might be of a view that you should just not bother. If something is difficult, then just look the other way. Don't explore. Exploration can be a problem. You can find out too much. But with a full moon, you are talking about the truth, and the truth is something that should be valued, that you should be looking for. And the truth isn't necessarily always pleasant, but this full moon is really saying that if you know the truth, you're going to be in a better position. And it will make things complicated. It might make things financially complicated. It might make things socially complicated. You see people for what they really are, but it really can't be helped. And perhaps it's just about facing reality, and it could be financial reality, the reality of a particular financial situation, which maybe just can't go on for much longer, maybe any longer. And so if you're tough with yourself and also with other people, as far as money is concerned, I think that would probably be the right approach. Now, Pisces, I don't want to say that it's all doom and gloom. I mean, it's not doom and gloom at all. But on a positive note, Mercury is getting really close to Jupiter. Mercury is now 14 Pisces. Of course, it's direct. Jupiter's at 15, 16 Cancer. So as Mercury moves towards this trine of Jupiter, that does give you a natural ability to say what's on your mind. If there's anything bothering you, you have an opportunity to communicate it. Communicate it not necessarily through words. You can communicate it through body language. You can communicate it through your silences, through your facial expressions. And in many cases, people will just understand. People will just understand without you having to say anything. And you shouldn't underestimate other people's perceptiveness. You might think that no one understands your motives, but maybe they do. It's like I can remember decades ago I was going to an astrology lecture, and it was in central London, and it was on a Saturday, and someone was wondering where I was. I just disappeared. I was, for about an hour or two, I just wasn't there. And there was speculation about why I wasn't there. And this woman, and she was a Sagittarian. She taught me horary astrology, and she knew exactly where I was and what I was doing. And what I was doing was I was sitting in my car waiting. She knew I was sitting in my car waiting because she knew there was free parking after noon, and she knew that I was waiting for midday before I would go to the lecture because I didn't want to get a ticket. And I was quite surprised that would occur to anyone. But it's kind of like this. It's like, you might think that no one understands what you're doing. No one understands your actions. But I think they do understand. So don't underestimate other people. They do get it. And, with this Mercury trine Jupiter, it's a fortunate aspect, and it does allow you to get on, very well with certain other people, and also to be found that you are understood. You can be understood. So it's important to give other people some credit. They're not as dense as they seem. I'm sure they're not dense at all, but there is a capacity for real understanding, and you're not misunderstood. I think most people, the people that matter, do get it. And that's it. That's all I've got to say about the 12 signs. And now I want to turn to the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Wednesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 22, which is grace. So, this hexagram, isn't really very exciting. I mean, it's about surface appearances. It's, how we appear. And there's not a great deal of substance to it. But, it may be saying that today, Wednesday, appearances do matter. The way we look is important. I mean, it shouldn't be important, but perhaps it is. And it's all about conduct, saying the right things, not saying anything too offensive, and just naturally fitting in. And we do have one line moving, the second line moving, and the second line is about something that is really not very substantial. Something we focus on which isn't important. It's not really the thing that matters. And, it spends a lot of time talking about beards, this hexagram. The beard is, it's a kind of a part of a body, but it's not a part of a body. It is of no substance. And so it may be sort of talking about unnecessary appendages or things that we value that really don't matter one way or another. And so there could just be a certain amount of superficiality today. I mean, that's really what I'm saying. And it could be that we are being superficial, or it could be that other people are being superficial as well, or maybe everyone's being superficial. And, we've got a moving line, so that means we move to a second hexagram, and the hexagram we move to is hexagram number 26, which is the taming power of the great. And, maybe this implies that there isn't much we can do. nothing of substance. We might like to do something of substance, but we just need to perhaps be disciplined. Obviously, we don't want to be trivial, though. I mean, there is a sense of worrying too much about style, how we look, what we look like, and it really doesn't matter. And where do we find that substance? If there is any substance, it probably comes from the past rather than the future. We need to think about what we've been told in the past, what we've learnt in the past, and it could be that the taming power of the great. I never know with this title, the taming power of the great. Is it the great taming us, or is the greatness within us being tamed? If I knew classical Chinese or any Chinese, I might be able to, work with the characters, but whatever. But I'm afraid I know no Chinese whatsoever. That is always a disadvantage in doing the I Ching. I mean, it's a great oracle, but if you don't know Chinese, you can't really be much of an innovator, can you? I mean, that is a problem with the I Ching. But the taming power of the great, we need to think about perhaps what was substantial in the past, and is there anything in ourselves which is substantial, which can go beyond the trivial? And so there's maybe a lot of thinking today, and I do think that today is, in the end, is going to perhaps be about style. It's about surface appearances, and as far as anything fundamental is concerned, maybe not. And so for that reason, today might seem rather unsatisfactory. But there are always going to be days like this, and unfortunately, maybe fortunately, style sometimes just can't be ignored, and that might say something about Wednesday. Anyway, that's all I've got to say for this video. I do hope you have a great day. I also hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.